Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing today? Good, I hope. Well, I'm doing fantastic. And as you know, even though you're not going to hear this for a little bit, we're still in January here. And last week I told you guys that, cold weather wimps here in South Florida went down into the 40s and it was for like a couple of days. And we were like, oh, I'm telling you, you realize what a wimp you are. You're like multi-layered because we don't have big coats over here. Oh yeah, there's a lot of sweaters and we're walking around like, how many scarves can you put around your head? But anyway, yeah, the weather's back a little bit more normal around here, which is it's actually dipping into the 60s at night. And since I live out a little bit further west, away from the beaches, like close to the Everglades, it's a little bit cooler, but it's nice weather and not fireplace weather. How's that? Which is what we had last week. And as a matter of fact, then of course, you guys know it's like I told my guest, every once in a while you're going to hear that my weird sounds because now it's dusk and all my, especially the parrots. I've got some blue crowns, and any of you who are familiar with parrots will know that there's two times during the day, especially that they just like God make a lot of noise. It's sunup and sundown. So you guys all know what that's about. But anyway, let's get to the good part. Anyway, and also, I did want to remind you guys that as far as links for either the shows on YouTube or MP3s, if you want to download the MP3 files for the shows or just listen to them directly, you can go to marlenepardo.com or miamighostchronicles.com. Either one. You can visit that. And of course, if you have any questions, suggestions, or if you want to send me a story over, just send it to Marlene at miamighostchronicles.com. But anyway, let's get to the good part, guys. And you're going to be very excited when you hear that I have a gentleman today by the name of Father Nathan G. Castle. Now, for the past 20 years, he has helped at least 250 people who died suddenly in order to adjust to the afterlife. These are victims of fires, automobile accidents, shootings, stabbings, and drownings that came to him in his dreams seeking help for resolving their interrupted death experiences. And although such contact with the other side was not something he sought out, Father Nathan has come to believe that providing such help is something the Holy Spirit has given him to do. In his new book, Afterlife Interrupted, Helping Stuck Souls Cross Over, Father Nathan shares 13 of those stories, including that of a 20-year-old auto mechanic named Ray who died in 1960 in a car fire. Now, Ray remained in a state of anger and isolation until Father Nathan and a prayer partner were able to help him to come to terms with his fate. I'm going to repeat Father Nathan's website address at the end of the show, but for any of you that are interested in listening on the podcast, even though I'll include it in the credits of the show, it's nathan-castle.com. Nathan-castle.com. So how are you doing today, Father Nathan?
I've never been better. It's good to be with you, Molly.
Likewise, it is fantastic to be interviewing you. And I'm going to ask you what I ask all my guests. How did this happen for you? Where was it something, like you said, they came to you in dreams? At what point did you realize this was maybe more than just a dream? How did this happen? This has got to be so interesting.
Yeah, it happened in two parts. I'm almost, I'll be 64 in March. So I grew up in a Catholic family in Southeast Texas. Mm-hmm. And part of the way I was taught about the universe and how it works is that we can send blessings to each other. You can bless somebody that's around you or somebody that's across town or in another state or even someone who's died already. So I was used to praying for the living and the dead, and that was no big deal. Mm-hmm. I grew up as a little Catholic guy in Catholic school, and we were taught about heaven, hell, and purgatory, mm-hmm. and that a lot of people were in this sort of middle state, at least when they died, but we could help them by praying for them and kind of speed them along. So I really like doing that, and I fell asleep every night, very busy, helping people. I imagine that they must be in line. That's the way I thought of it.
Yeah.
Well, my dad took me to the bank, and you know how when you go into a bank, they have those ropes that go back and forth,
Yes.
I just thought it must be like that. If you're patient, you'll get your turn. You just have to wait. But that if you got prayed for, you could cut in line. You'd get there faster. And so as a child, that's what I was doing. And then I was ordained a priest when I was 29. And then about when I was 41 or 2, I was just on a retreat. I live in Arizona, and I was giving a retreat for some people up in the mountains in the northern part of the state. Went to sleep and had this dream that I'd like to tell your listeners about. You mentioned him already. His name is Ray.
Okay, so this was the first dream that you had. This was the first experience that you had
of this kind.
Okay.
Of what I call a contact dream.
Okay.
I in my book, I make a distinction between having a dream and receiving a dream.
Okay.
I just made that up myself. But like last night, I just had dreams about my psychobabble, this stuff going on in my head in my life. But about once a week, I have one where somebody else gets in my stream of consciousness while I'm asleep and tells me enough about what they're upset about that I can try to pray with partner and help them out. Usually, they're showing me scenes of how they died suddenly and violently.
Yes.
So, as you mentioned at the outset, car crashes and calamities of one kind or another. And but they're buffered. I'm not terrified.
All right.
I believe the Holy Spirit loves me and is not going to mistreat me in my sleep. So I'm always respected, but I'm told just what I need to see to have enough material to go on.
Okay.
So that time it was a dream. I was minding my own business. In fact, I play golf, and I was dreaming about finishing a round of golf with a friend.
Okay.
So far it's my business. We went into the bar to have a drink after the round of golf, and we found that in the bar there was a silent auction going on for a charity. You know what that looks like? Have you been to one of those?
No.
A silent auction?
No.
Usually a lot of people have donated gift baskets or, I don't know, memorabilia, sports memorabilia, or it could be concert tickets or restaurants. It could be just about anything that people can donate. And you walk around the room and you write on a piece of paper next to it what you're willing to bid on it. And it might go on for an hour, and everybody else, if you get interested in something, you keep checking back on it to make sure that you still, that somebody hasn't gone above you in the auction.
Okay.
And then at the end of the hour or whatever they call a time, and then whoever had the highest bid, pays back to the charity and gets the thing that they bid on. So anyway, I was at a silent auction. And I've run nonprofits most of my life, so raising money is familiar. So anyway, I was at this silent auction with my friend, having finished the round of golf, and I look across the room and I see the horrible piece of art on the wall in a frame. And I said to my friend, "Look at that god-awful thing. It's so horrible. Who would donate that to a charity?" But, Marlene, how sometimes when there's a car crash on the interstate,
yes.
You know that it's terrible, but you want to look at it anyway?
No matter what, yeah.
And so I crossed the room to get a closer look at it, and when I started to get near it, it moved toward me, and it was sort of like a big screen TV, just about those, I don't know what, they're 50-inch screens or something. Anyway, it moved toward me, and inside the frame, a little film started to play. It went into motion, and I was looking at a guy who was in his early 20s. He was sitting on the hood, well, not on the hood, actually on the radiator of an old car from the late 50s, the kind with lots of chrome and fins. Mm-hmm. Remember those?
Yes.
And so he had his feet were on the bumper. He's sitting on the radiator. The hood's open above him, and he's facing away from the car, and he bursts into flames.
Oh.
So it wasn't a car crash. It was a man who looked like he just spontaneously combusted. I don't know why. I didn't know why, but he was screaming as he burned to death.
Oh, my God.
And, it was so unlike anything else I'd ever dreamed. As soon as I woke up from it, I knew it was different.
Okay.
I think anyone in that circumstance would feel the same.
Let me ask you something. When you saw him, were you able to see his face? Like, that? Did you realize it was somebody you didn't recognize, or you weren't able to see his face?
I saw that he was a young white man, but it wasn't a face I recognized.
Okay.
And I thought you know how a lot of movies orient you to time right at the very beginning by costumes or music in the background or sometimes automobiles?
Right.
That's what it felt like. He was telling me that he died in the late 50s or early 60s in a fire involving a car. So I woke up from it, and I thought, I just said a prayer quickly, and I said, hello, my name is Nathan. You just showed me this in a dream, I think. If I can help you, I will. And I wrote down the dream. I found something to write on and wrote it down. I prayed for him for a little while, and then I said, whoever you are, I'll figure this out, and I'll be back in touch.
Okay.
And so I woke up that morning, and because I was on a retreat, it was sort of leisurely. It was up in the mountains, and people wake up in the mountains, and they're going to get a cup of coffee or whatever. So I found a friend of mine who I knew had spiritual gifts that were uncommon, and who would not judge me if I told her this story. And I just said to her, this is what happened. Do you think we could find a moment later on to go into prayer and see if we are led to help this guy somehow?
Okay.
Figure this out. So that's what we did. And when we went into prayer and we got quiet, and we always protect ourselves in prayer. I use St. Michael the Archangel and Holy Mary and stuff because just the same as I would not pick up hitchhikers today on my way home.
Yes.
In this plane, in the physical world, yes. I have the same concern with the next life and the spirit world.
Okay.
My outlook toward other people is mostly positive, but not everybody's well behaved, at least not at the moment.
That's true. That's true.
And so we protected ourselves in prayer, which brought St. Michael and Holy Mary and a number of the other Catholic saints. That's kind of the way I was taught to pray. And anyway, we asked for the guy, and my friend was able to bring him through in speech. So she was able to, often it's called channeling.
Yes.
And try to avoid that word because the Catholic Christian world, sometimes one gets really radioactive, loaded up with judgment and so on. And nevertheless, it was the guy speaking through her. She said, he wants to talk to you. Would that be okay? And I said, well, we said our prayers, and I'm not going looking for him. He's the one that found me, and it sounds like he needs help. So sure, go ahead. So the first words out of her mouth were, who the hell does he think he is, taking me just when my life was getting good?
Oh. So he was upset.
Yeah, he was. Who the hell does he think he is, taking me just when my life was getting good? So I introduced myself and said, well, hi, my name is Nathan, and you're talking through my friend, and let's see how we can help. What's going on? And he said, well, he was mad, and I said, who are you mad at? And he said, well, God. And I said, well, why are you mad at God? Well, because he took me just when my life was getting good. I said, okay. Well, he explained that he was 20 years old when he died. He had gotten his high school girlfriend pregnant their senior year when they were 18. They married, and their child was like a year and a half old or so. He had gone into business with a buddy in a rented house that had a detached garage, and they were using the garage as a little auto repair business. And he explained that on Sundays their routine was that his wife would cook for them, and while they were having their meal, his friend, they had too much to drink, and the friend made some sort of comment that Ray, his name is Ray, felt was sexy and directed at his wife.
Oh. So
he was offended that his wife's honor had been, besmirched or something.
Right.
And they decided they got angry, and they decided to take it outside. So they went across the yard over to the shop, and he was sitting on the radiator as they were fighting and arguing, and somehow he caught fire. He doesn't know how, and he was wearing greasy clothes, and he was sitting on a radiator. So maybe he came into contact with some wire that was live, or
so literally what you saw is how it happened. Because when you said, I was wondering if he was in an accident, but he basically was showing literally how he died.
Yeah, you'd think so when you see a car and somebody on fire, but no, he didn't really know how it happened either, because once it started happening, it all happened at once. He was on fire, and he was screaming, and that's it. It felt a little like a counseling appointment. I've been in most of my career has been as a pastor on university campuses. But when you're a pastor anywhere, you get a certain amount of counseling appointments.
Right.
And it's common for people you don't know very well to make an appointment to come in and talk about something.
Okay.
So one of the things I do early on in an appointment is say, well, Marlene, what can I do to help you? What is it you want to accomplish? What's the trouble, or how can I help? So that's what I said to him. Well, he told me his name, Ray. I said, well, Ray, how can I help you? And he said, my wife, she's dying. And I want to greet her when she passes, but I can't the way I am.
Okay.
So he explained that he had died in 1960. It took him a little while to figure it out. I've learned that some people pay attention to time and others don't.
Okay.
And some are kind of clear on it and others are sort of foggy. But he figured out he died in 1960, and his wife, this would have been happening around the year 2000 or maybe a year or two before that. So anyway, it had been maybe 35 to 40 years previous, and he said, my wife, she married again, she married up, she married her a lawyer and moved to South Carolina. They raised my son, and they had no more children. I have no beef with that man. He did a nice job raising my son, but my wife's dying of cancer, and I want to greet her when she passes, and I can't the way I am.
So in other words, he was aware he was dead, and he had kept tabs on what was happening with his family.
In his wife's life.
Right,
and
with his wife and his son dying. And everything.
Yeah, exactly. And so I said, well, it's do you know what year it is? He said, well, he knew that he had watched his wife age, so he knew that many years had gone by. And I said, well, look, it looks like you don't have an awful lot to show for all these years.
I was going to ask you, what was he then holding him back? His anger? Was that it? What was keeping him like?
That was part of it. Anger. He was angry at God because he had been taught as a child that the reason why people die at all is because God takes them.
Oh.
Have you ever heard anybody use that phrase?
Well, almost in a sense, especially when you're young, like taken before their time, that kind of thinking. Yeah.
Well, that's the idea that he had in his head, that the reason he was dead was that God took him. And who the hell does he think he is taking me just when my life is ended? So essentially God had set him on fire from his point of view. And so why in the world would he want to be with God that set him on fire? But he did want to be with his wife. And so I just said, okay, well, let's get started on that. And I told him, now look, this has been all these many years, and cancer has its own schedule. I'm going to have to kind of hustle you through this process, and you might not like it. And remember, you came to me. Right. You don't have to stay with me if you don't want. But I think it's on me to kind of hurry you through, and I might have to push harder than I normally would. Because it did feel like a counseling appointment. It's just that he happened to have died.
Okay.
But I was taught as a child that all of us stay alive after we die.
Okay.
Not just the good boys and girls or the Catholic ones or the Christian ones, but that's just the way God made every human person, that we all live after we die.
Right.
Just the rules. And
right.
So I just said, I'll do what I can to help you, and let's get this stuff figured out. So we just kind of peeled it back one layer at a time. The anger at God. I don't remember some of the other parts of it. It's all in the book. It's the prologue chapter of the book. But anyway, it took us a series of meetings over about a 3-week period.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you. How long did it take for you to have that conversation with him?
Well, my friend and I were figuring this out. All we did is kind of try to use common sense. She was also an active practicing Catholic, and we just did what we thought was sensible, and asked questions and helped him kind of get over some stuff. And he was really, really angry. I said, "Well, it looks like your anger's in the way. Could we somehow move through some of that? What if you're wrong about God? What if people don't die? What if you didn't die because God caused your death? What if it was just an accident and it's nobody's fault? That's another possibility." Okay. And when I deal with grieving people, sometimes people want to lash out and blame somebody, and sometimes there's someone who's blameworthy, but not always. Sometimes it's just unfortunate,
Right.
So anyway, we worked on that, and then I thought, it seems to me, if you've not, he had chosen, he said, not to be with anybody since he died. He hadn't been with another soul since he died.
Oh, so let me ask you, just out of curiosity, did you ever, in these conversations, did it come out like he was an angry guy to begin with, or was it just that one incident that he was angry about? You know how there's these personalities that they're real quick to anger, and that's just the
yes,
way they
I have found that, and then sometimes I've found that that sometimes people are sort of stuck in this life before they die.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you know at least one person who's kind of socially isolated themselves?
Oh yeah, yes.
Who makes it hard to be around them, and but yeah, so sometimes people keep doing that after they die, not because they're being punished. It's just what they're used to, and they want more of it,
yes.
Or at least they choose more of it.
Yes.
Sometimes they get so used to that they kind of get out of practice of normal human interaction,
mm-hmm.
and they just choose to be alone.
Right.
So I've dealt with some like that. They don't come to me until they've been vetted. I learned that I'm not getting stuck souls at random. I'm getting people that are, I feel like the discharge nurse at the end of a healthcare continuum.
But let me ask you, when did was it just that he lived in that area where you were at the retreat, or why
Georgia,
then there? Just
I don't know. For a while, it seemed like the first few years I was doing this. I grew up in the extreme southeast corner of Texas.
Okay.
Do you know where Port Arthur is?
No, not specifically.
Port Arthur is right on the Gulf of Mexico on the Louisiana border.
Okay.
Being Texas is as close as you can get to Florida.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I've been like to Gulfport and all along that coast up there, like, like if you're going westbound on I-10. So.
Yeah. Well, I-10 goes right through my hometown and through the region anyway. But it's funny because when these started happening, for the first few years, it felt like everybody was from Georgia, the Carolinas, Florida. I felt
oh, really?
A territory. Later that shifted, but for a while, for whatever reason, I kept getting these people from the southeastern states. But anyway, back to finishing the Ray story.
Okay.
We felt like it would be his main goal was to greet his wife, but he hadn't been with anybody. It just seemed sensible that maybe we should get him back in circulation with anybody.
Okay.
Get him out of isolation and get him into companionship before trying to make this leap to go visit his wife when she passed. So I just asked him. He had told me about his mother, and that I asked, "Who taught you about God?" Because you might have been misinformed and about God. And he said, "Well, his mother and brother Ray. Oh no, brother James. Brother James." I said, "Who's brother James?" Well, he was our pastor, and he's the one that taught that God takes people. And he said, "Well, he was my pastor." And I said, "Well, I'm a pastor too. I'm a Catholic priest." And he went, "Oh, shit."
Oh, he didn't even know this? Oh, my God.
No, he didn't know he was talking to a Catholic priest, and I think he had been taught that we were like of the devil or something.
Oh, boy.
he had been taught that Catholic priests were, not good. So anyhow.
Okay.
I said, "Well, yeah, I am, and I've known God all my life, and I just think that, your pastor had it all wrong. He just made a mistake. I think God loves people, and God's not burning anybody alive."
Okay.
So anyway, he had said that his mother taught him to pray, and that she made him kneel next to his bed, and she beat him while he said his prayers.
Beat him?
Beat him.
Oh, wow.
I said, "Well, why'd she do that?" And he said, "I don't know. That's just what she did." And I asked him, I said, "You were a father. Your child was still a baby when you died, but would you have beat him while he said his prayer?" And he said, "Of course not." I said, "Well, I'm sorry your mother did that, but do you see how that might have given you some weird ideas about God?"
Yes. Wow.
So maybe you've been acting on some incorrect information. Would you at least consider that? Well, he didn't want to, because people don't like to have their mind changed.
Yes.
When's the last time you changed your mind about something important?
It takes a lot, especially when it's rooted in an authority figure like your mother.
Yeah, your mother and your pastor.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I said, remember, you don't have to do anything I say. You're the one that came to me. I'm just telling you what I see. Right. And by the way, it seems to me it would be good if we got you into circulation and with somebody. And I thought it was mother, but I thought, no, she used to beat him, not the mom. What about your dad? Well, he said he died in the war. And I said, Vietnam? No, he said Korea. He had died in the 1960s. got
Right.
my wars, out of order. And and I said, "What about your dad?" He said, "Well, he died when I was 10. I didn't really know him. I was kind of afraid of him." And I said, "Well, if we asked him to come for you, do you think you'd be afraid of him still?" He said, "Well, I don't know." And I said, "Did you guys ever have a really good time together? Can you remember?" That's just a counseling technique when people go dark. You try to get them to go light.
Okay.
Well, okay, let's not talk about that anymore. Let's talk about something happy. Tell me about the best thing that ever happened to you, something like that. So I asked about his dad and him having a good time. And he said, "Yeah, once we went and looked at cars together." And I said, "Well, what if we were to ask your dad to come, would you be scared?" He said, "I don't think so." I said, "Well, could you create your space so that we invite him to not come too close enough for you to get a look at him and decide whether you wanted him to come closer?" And he said, "Well, I think I could do that." So I said, "Okay, well, are you ready? Is it okay for me to ask him to come?" And so he said, "Yeah." So we said, "Okay." I just said a prayer, and I didn't make a great big deal out of it. And he didn't like priests to start with.
Yeah.
God, could you please send Ray's dad if he's available, because Ray would like to see his dad. And I just said, "Ray, now be still and look around." And he said, "Oh my God, look over there." And I said, "Well, I can't see what you see, and you're going to have to describe it." He said, "Well, it's my dad." And I said, "Well, does he look scary?" "No." I said, do you think you're being tricked?" "No." I said, "Well, okay. Do you think you'd be okay for him to take you on a visit, get you go for a walk or something, get you moving around a bit? Because we're going to need to get you out of this little place you're in if you're going to greet your wife." So
Okay.
that made sense to him. And so he said, "Okay." And I said, "Okay, well, we're going to go now, but we'll check in on you in a few days, and we'll get an update. How's that?" So he agreed to that. So a few days later, we went back into prayer, always protecting ourselves, always, just not diving into the spirit world. But I try to make that real clear to people.
Right.
I used Michael the Archangel and Mary and Benedict and a bunch of the saints. Anyhow, we went back in and we found out, said, "How'd it go?" And he said, "Well, we had a good time." I said, "What'd you guys do?" And he said, "Well, we went to look at cars." I said, "Well, how'd you do that? Your dad died in 1950-something, early in the 50s, and you died in 1960. He said, "No, we went and looked at the new ones."
Wow. Yeah. They had that in
So that
common.
just broke the ice. And doesn't that sound like a guy thing to you?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's like what you would think that maybe they would have done if they would have both lived. If they had that in
Yeah, and
common.
guys might not want to have a heart-to-heart talk, but they might go get reacquainted over looking at cars. And we knew that Ray loved cars. He created an auto repair business. So
Right.
that's what they did. Yeah, so I said, "Okay, well, good for you. Now you know how to move around. You know how to. Now we just need to get you ready to greet your wife, and we needed to help them over that anger that it was God's fault and so on." And I said, "Well, I just think," and I said, "Ray, I think I know what the problem is, and I don't think you're going to like it." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, every time you talk about your wife, you sound like a caveman. She died like 40 years ago, and you act like you still belong, you own her, and you sound like you might just grab her by the hair and drag her into your cave." And so he was mad at me because I was, being pretty blunt. But I felt it was important. I needed to move this thing along. And I said, "I think that this lady she's in her 60s. You were only married to her for a year or two. She's going to have met lots of other people she loves that she probably had parents and siblings, and you're not the only person that loved her. And you're probably not going to be the only person that's eager to see her when she passes. I think you're going to be in a group. Would you be okay with that?" And he kind of hadn't thought of that, and he grumbled a little bit. And I said, "I'm not sure how it works, but I just don't think you ought to assume that you have the rights to be at the head of the line and that you're the most important person she's going to lay eyes on. You're certainly important because she only married twice, and you're the only dead husband. She only had one child, and that was with you. You certainly belong near the front of the line, but just don't make the whole thing about you. How about that?" So he grumbled about that, but he thought about it. Well, then the last time we met with him, we met up and said, "Okay, Ray, what's new with you?" And he said, "Big news, my wife passed."
Okay.
I said, "Oh, tell us about that." And he said, "Well, it was kind of the way you said. There were some other people, but you'd have been proud of me. I was a perfect gentleman."
Good.
Good. And so he said, "Okay, well, good for you. Now you know how to move around. You know how you know how to now we just need to get you ready to greet your wife." And we needed to move this thing along. And I said, "I think that this lady is she's in her 60s. You were only married to her for a year or two. She's going to have met lots of other people she loves that she probably had parents and siblings, and you're not the only person that loved her. And you probably not going to be the only person that's eager to see her when she passes. I think you're going to be in a group. Would you be okay with that?" So I said, well, Ray, I knew you had it in you all along. It looks like our job here is done, don't you think? You wanted to greet your wife, and now you've done it. I think our work here is finished, don't you? And he said, yes, sir, I think so. So I said, well, before you go, now that you know how to greet people when they die and move into the afterlife, I wonder if you wouldn't mind keeping an eye on me, and when it's my turn to pass, would you mind being there to greet me? And he said, why, sir, I'd be most honored. Just look for the perfect gentleman.
So he had come down as far as by the time you finished with him, his anger had kind of, it sounds like it had, in other words, that anger, he was beyond it. That thing, like you said, like, why me? Like,
he was willing to change his way of thinking, that maybe I was given incorrect information. Maybe God isn't the reason. Maybe God didn't set me on fire. I don't know. He didn't go into all of it. But.
Right. That thing about, like, why me, that kind of like, when it's all about me, like, and it sounds like once he got beyond that, then it sounds like that you were able to show him how to progress. And let me ask you, to him, like you said, he was by himself. Where was he existing? Like in a great place? Did he ever describe it? Was it where he used to live at before?
Yeah, it was pretty gray, and nondescript. He hadn't done anything to decorate it. It wasn't indoors. It wasn't outdoors. It was, and he was with a guide, what Catholics would call a guardian angel. Mm-hmm. But they're limited by what we will permit. And so he wasn't willing to go anywhere, so his guardian just had to kind of hang out with him.
Okay.
Where he was, Catholic people would call it purgatory. The word didn't come up. He wasn't Catholic to begin with, so he wouldn't have used that language.
Right.
But he was, at least wherever he was able to keep an eye on his wife as she moved through her life. So, but I don't know how to answer your question any better than that, really.
Right. No. I was just curious, like, in that in-between place, because that's the only way I can think of it, as in, is it, was he living, or, even though he was by himself, was he surrounded by the familiarity of a place where he used to live at? Or was it just
he wasn't, because he wouldn't permit it. He chose to be isolated. And a lot of the souls that I help make a similar choice. They go about it in different ways, but some of them really want to be left alone.
So once you had that experience, that's incredible what you described, when you're having that dream and your attention is brought about by that painting, which is like, you couldn't help but look at it. And it was like, what a hook, because that's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And then,
well,
did you think this was like an isolated incident, or what happened?
No, after that, those dreams began coming about once a week.
Wow.
And so I invested in a good little notebook to have in the nightstand, and I wrote them down, and the same prayer partner and I would meet, and we kind of learned a method where it didn't take us several sessions. We could move through them in about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
Ray was really the only one that we had to spend more than one session with.
Really?
Yeah, and then I learned that the people that were brought to me were vetted. They were really ready to move, whether they knew it or not.
You beat me to my next question, because that's exactly what I was going to ask you. Is like, is there a common denominator in these people that come to you? Is it them because they're ready at that point?
Yeah, they are. Whether they realize they're ready or not. One guy called himself ready enough. And you know how that is. With a lot of things, there's sort of the continuum. You know, you're mildly excited, or you're over the top excited, or whatever. Mm-hmm. With a great many things that in our lives, there's some sort of continuum about them. And I only get these people. They don't need to be persuaded against their will.
Right.
It really does feel like the person in a hospital that's in charge of getting you home. You know, teaching you what you need to do in order to leave here and thrive.
What have you found is one of the most common reasons why people get stuck? Is it anger? Is it fear of the being judged? Not understanding the death state? Or maybe not even believing
Those
in
are
the afterlife? How's that?
Well, the funny thing is, whether they believed in it or not, they have to acknowledge that they're in it.
Okay,
I
right,
mean,
exactly.
at least the ones I'm dealing with, there probably are ghosts that are perplexed about whether they are dead or alive.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not dealing with the whole panoply of the universe and the afterlife. I have this one little niche,
Right.
and I kind of stay in my lane. It's just a
Well, no,
thing.
and and I always wonder about that. What happens to this person who thinks when you die, that's it. It's spiritually. In other words, they think that when your body dies, that's the end for you, and then they die, and they find out that that's not exactly what happens to you after you die. In other words, that you have a soul, you have a spirit. What happened?
Yeah.
Are they like, oh,
Well,
what do I do now?
Well, they just have to adjust. Oh my God. Well, it did turn out that I am still alive, just in a different way. That one of they do have something that sounds like a body. Like I could tell Ray to look around, even though he didn't have eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
He had some center of vision, and the verb "look" meant something to him,
Right.
very much like it did when he lived here. People I've learned that age is something that can be flexible.
Okay.
They can go back to an earlier part of their life and look like they did when they were growing up, or they can look older if they want to. The people who come for them can manifest in a way that makes them most happy to see them. A lot of people that die in old age come back in their 30s or 40s or 50s.
Okay.
Anyway, I've learned a lot of things along the way. And even you mentioned 250. By now, it's probably more like 350 because I wrote that some time ago.
Okay. Do they
and I have
ever
a lot of other
describe
stories.
where they've had relatives or loved ones come for them and they've refused to go, or is it that they just don't see them?
No, I've never had anybody decide to stay back.
Okay.
Everybody has passed. Now, sometimes they've passed in a group.
Okay.
And sort of a spokesperson emerged, and not every last person had to do this dialogue with me and my prayer partner.
Okay.
Sometimes they're sort of grouped, and somebody steps up and leads, and then they pass together if they want to. Nobody's forced to do anything they don't want to do.
And
but
what do they?
Oftentimes there's some sort of conveyance, like a boat goes up, or a train, or something that involves motion, and the decision about whether to get aboard or not. Or sometimes it's an escalator or a moving sidewalk.
Interesting.
There's lots of different movement metaphors that people can then just decide whether they want to go or not. And if they decide to stay back, they're not shamed, like they're getting left behind and there'll be no other chance.
Right. It's
if
just
you go to
maybe
an airport,
they're not
there's
ready
always
for
going to be a
whatever
next plane.
reason. Father Nathan, what do they want from you? Is it acknowledgement? Is it a chance to say what happened to them? What is it that they want from you that's basically got them stuck? That once they talk to you, is it reassurance?
Well, it varies. It varies according to what what the problem was. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I just need to say, well, I'm so sorry this happened to you.
Okay.
And what I don't want, but it seems clear to me that you don't want more of what you've had.
Okay.
You're ready for something different, and I'm the guy to help you figure out what that's going to be. And my real job is to help you move. And I've never died, as far as I know, and I'm no expert in that, but I do seem to have one little expertise in helping people cross, and I can help you identify who you might want to have come for you.
Okay.
And so I often give them three choices. Can you think of anybody who loved you who died before you did? In other words, presume that you have somebody on the other side already. who'd be
Okay.
happy to come and help you and who'd you be happy to see.
Okay.
And so most of the times that's relatives,
Right.
lots of grandmothers,
Yeah.
older, not even siblings a lot of the time. It's more the next generation, aunts and uncles,
Mm-hmm.
um, and way more women than men.
Really?
I think, don't you? You're a woman and I'm a man, but don't you think women are kinder than men a lot of the time?
Yeah, they're more. Yeah, we're touchy feely. What can I say? We're more
Yeah,
touchy
so there's
feely. How's that? We show it more. Yeah, you're right.
a lot of people have been comforted or consoled by
Yes.
a female relative.
Yes.
A lot of them are teachers. The teachers show up in unusual numbers.
Really?
Your second grade teacher shows up.
Wow.
Do you remember as a child having some adult make you feel great about yourself?
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say my second grade teacher was a nun, so I was gonna.
Uh,
Sister Regina
well,
shows up. It's like what? That's
well, I've had a few nuns, and I'm from a family. Both of my aunts were nuns, so
really
that wouldn't
okay.
scare me. I grew up with them. But it's somebody who's kind and helpful. Sometimes it's people that you knew on the playground.
Interesting.
Maybe not even that well, but somebody that was in elementary school with you. Um, sometimes, sometimes it's celebrities, because even though we didn't meet these people, we admired them.
Okay.
And all the fuss right now about Kobe Bryant. Lots of
Yes.
people who never met Kobe Bryant are grieving his loss,
Yes.
because somehow he's iconic. He touched their heart. I read in the paper this morning in Tucson, some local columnist had his Kobe Bryant's poster on his bedroom wall as a child,
Yes.
and just felt like he'd lost a friend, even though they never met. So sometimes
Exactly.
it'll be a celebrity because that's what they asked for. And then other times it will just be the luck of the draw. It'll just be some random person that shows up and says, I'll help.
Right. I imagine the most
It's
appropriate
really,
person then for them as far as yeah, what I guess whoever comforts them or makes them feel somebody that like you said that they trust.
and recently I've had more and more stories of people being in something like a clinic, something like a spa, or a place that provided for them exactly what they needed, with kind people to help them.
Okay.
And then when they're done with what this place can do for you, they're told, "We're so glad to see the way that you've improved or gotten your strength or whatever, and you're really now beyond anything that we can do for you. When we're hopeful that you'll choose to go on to the next place." And some of them have said, "People have been so consistently kind to me that why would I mistrust the next thing?"
Okay.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
One of the things I've learned is the ones that I've dealt with have not been judged at all by anyone,
Right.
and they
And
just
it
find it delightful.
it makes me wonder like that story that you said about Ray, what he was told as a child about what God was like. In other words, that almost like what had happened to him was a form of punishment. It makes you think there's other
Yeah,
people that sometimes think the same thing, especially when
yeah.
they haven't had that much life experience. How old was he? 20?
He was 20.
Right. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. I've dealt with children down to as little as 5,
okay.
and the younger they are, the less life experience they have.
Mm-hmm.
Although not that many of them, I think they tend to pass more easily than people do as they get a little older and their lives get more complicated.
Right. That they have different things, I hate to say it, that hang you up
Yes,
versus
yeah.
when you're a child and you're more accepting. And how about are there people that sometimes pass away either because they were heavily medicated or something that was going on with them where they're not really sure that they're dead? They just
I've had people that were drunk that
okay.
were died in accidental deaths while they were at least mildly drunk,
Wow.
enough to change their consciousness, and who then have to move through that a little bit.
Okay.
They don't stay drunk, but
Okay.
they might have hazier recall of what happened because they weren't thinking clearly at the time that they passed.
Okay.
I've seen that.
How about guilt? Guilt, let's say if they did something,
Uh,
for lack of a better word, stupid, either towards themselves
yes,
or towards somebody else.
yeah. Sometimes they've. In my book, one of the guys uh, accidentally drove. He was on a double date, and he was the driver in the early '50s in Upper New York State.
Mm-hmm.
And he took a turn on a dark road in a forest, and he heard the rumble of wood under the wheels and thought he was on a bridge, but it turned out to be a pier.
Oh.
And he drove the car off the end of the pier, and he and the three companions drowned.
Oh.
And he stayed back because he thought he needed to be responsible and not leave the scene of the accident.
That I could see definitely how that, not only for yourself, but three people that were in the vehicle with you. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then he didn't feel guilty about that so much as he felt guilty about he had borrowed his grandmother's car, and he had just graduated high school, and he felt like he should stay there until the police come or the insurance or something. He just felt like he was responsible for something bad that had happened. He shouldn't leave the scene. That's
Almost
the
it
idea
sounds
that
like he
formed.
was like stuck in that moment. You know, that
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Have you ever dealt with, maybe some of your listeners have, with PTSD or
Yes.
trauma
Yes.
looping?
Yes.
When people have a trauma of different kinds, sometimes they have a very persistent kind of little movie in their head.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people with PTSD don't like to go to sleep because they can control their cognition better during the day than they can at night.
Yeah. Yes.
And then they have night terrors because the thing that's inside them keeps
Right.
playing in the night.
Yeah, that memory is very fresh always, even though it's years later. They
Yes, and so some of these folk they have a trauma memory at the end of their life,
okay.
and they're replaying it somehow.
And you know what? It's sometimes and I'm glad you point that out, because we kind of think that once you're dead, you're beyond that kind of like human-like experience, what you described as PTSD. And what you're saying
Yes.
is that even if you're dead, you could still be caught in that PTSD last moment of your life.
Yeah, what I've learned is there's nothing automatic about dying that makes everything better in a twinkling, in an instant.
Uh-huh.
I do believe if you cooperate, that things will get better, but sometimes it's sort of like physical therapy, you know.
Okay.
The physical therapist has to make you do some reps,
Right.
and it's going to hurt a little bit, but only on your way to getting better.
Yes.
And
exactly.
so sometimes people have to choose to move through some difficult material and get over it. So, and sometimes they need to forgive someone,
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
change their mind, or at least lower their level of anger.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be getting rid of it entirely, but lowering it sufficiently, almost like turning the knob down, the volume.
Right.
Okay, like one guy died in Savannah
Mm-hmm.
he was in a car and they were widening the interstate, and he saw that it looked dangerous to him, and just about the time that registered, some building material along the freeway started collapsing in a domino style way, moving toward him, and he thought he was going to get smushed, and he got out of the car to run, and he did get smushed.
Oh.
And he was stuck mostly because he was just so angry that whoever was responsible, the contractor or whoever,
Right.
who in the world put the public at risk this way.
Yes.
And he was just so angry about that he couldn't see straight. That was the only thought that he could form. And
Right.
he's in the book also. He was 27 years old, and he happened to be a person who took a lot of care about his physical appearance.
Right. So he
his
didn't like getting
products
smushed, is what you're saying?
When he saw what his face looked like after his accident, he was so appalled about the bloody mess that he had become that he was just so grossed out and angry that he just froze. He just couldn't get over the fact that he went from being a handsome guy who took good care of his appearance
Yeah.
to being this bloody pulp.
That's just his emotional makeup. Maybe somebody that's just the way what he cared about. Profoundly, it sounds like,
Yes.
but yeah. And
I hope that any of your listeners who were really fixed on one idea about themselves will at least give somebody around them a chance to talk them out of it.
Yes. Yeah,
we can form ideas about ourselves and we can paint ourselves into a corner with one idea, and sometimes that's why these folks are stuck in between as they pass.
Let me ask you, and obviously you made it clear they're there by their choice, by their own choice. Now, and like you said, when they're ready to move on, and like you said, that scenario where if there's a group and the ones that are ready to go can go, and if they're not, they don't.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you think happens when we pray outside of the scenario that you said where you have somebody that is channeling them and you're actually able to converse with them? When we pray for a soul that's in that situation, without knowing specifics, we might be just praying for anybody. We don't know a name or circumstance or anything. Are we praying that something like a light bulb goes off? Or what do you think happens when we pray for somebody like that?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. And I go by my childhood training, which I think was really very good, that God never lets a prayer go to waste.
Right.
And that God will always know the best way to deliver mercy and goodness to somebody if I intend that. And so I grew up, I remember somewhere in first grade, I think, I was taught that if yours was the prayer that moved somebody from purgatory into heaven, they'd be your friend forever.
Right. In other words, you don't have to say the prayer was specifically for this person, their name. You don't have to have a name or a scenario or or that it could just be a free floater. In other words, it doesn't for it to work.
And I'm sure your audience is all over the map in terms of spiritual and religious belief and so on. But our little Catholic piece of the universe has this custom. In fact, we have the whole month of November devoted to it. That's why All Saints' Day is November the 1st, and All Souls' Day is the 2nd. We pray for the whole month of November for anybody who's died who would benefit by our prayers.
Right.
I use this when I was away at school. My parents didn't go to college, but they were determined that I and my brothers and sisters would.
Okay.
And my dad got me a checking account when I was 14, so I'd know how to write a check and save money, be responsible with money. And when I got to college, he didn't like to talk on the phone. I'd call home, and he might answer the phone in the bedroom, and my mom would get on the one in the kitchen, and he hardly would talk. She'd do all the talking. And then he'd get tired of it, and he'd say, "Son, I'm going to go now. Is there anything you need?"
Okay.
Well, that always meant money. And I'd say, "No, Dad, I'm doing pretty well." Or maybe I would say, "Yeah, I'm a little short. I could use a little bit." And then he would just make a deposit in my checking account.
Yeah.
And he never asked me what I was going to spend the money on because he trusted me to be responsible because he had raised me that way.
Right.
And so after he died, I took up the practice of praying for him. Actually, I was praying for him a lot because his death was long and slow, and he was in dementia and coma and so on. When you have somebody in a coma, you don't know how you can help them, but it doesn't mean you don't want to anyway. I prayed for him anyway.
Sure.
And after he died, I kept praying for him, and I just thought of it the same way. I don't know, Dad, I don't know what you need, but I want to give you the means to do whatever you want to do, and if my prayer can strengthen you, and I trust that it can some mysterious way, I'm going to pray for you. So I imagine putting money in his account, giving him the freedom to do something he might not have been able to do otherwise.
Father Nathan, let me ask you something. Looking back now, did you ever have any type of experiences earlier in your life, even as a child, that you just didn't recognize at that time, that maybe there were people who were stuck, that were deceased, that were trying to reach out?
I did, and I mention it. I spend the first 3 chapters of the book kind of describing a little of my background because my story is so strange that I felt like the reader deserves a little bit of an orientation to who I am and how I was formed. Yeah, it was John F. Kennedy.
Really?
I was born in 1956. I was 7 years old in November of 1963. I was a Catholic school kid in the 2nd grade, and the president's picture was on the wall next. So there was like this trinity of Jesus, the Pope, and the president. Mm-hmm. And the day that he was shot was a Friday at noon. We had just come in from lunch and recess, and this other second grade teacher came running and screaming, "The president's been shot." They had us kneel next to our desks and pray for the president. And then, of course, he was dead. We didn't know that until we got home. But and then all that weekend, were you old enough to remember that?
I was 3 years old, so I was
Okay.
I was born in 1960.
Well,
No, I don't remember. It was like,
well, I was 7, and I was a precocious kid. I was paying attention to as much of the adult world as I could understand. But anyway, it was such a long weekend. There was nothing on TV on every channel except people crying. And then there was the funeral with the horse with nobody on it and the eternal flame. And it was just awful. And then when it was time to go back to school, I think it was Monday night, we were going to go back to school on Tuesday. And I went, instead of praying my prayers for the souls in purgatory, I just decided to pray for the president. And so I made the sign of the cross, and I said, I'd like to pray for President Kennedy. I knew his kids were about my age, and I thought he must be very sad to be dead and not with his kids and stuff. And when I prayed for him, I could see him, and he could see me.
wow.
That's the first time that ever happened. He didn't talk, but I knew he was sitting on the ground in a kind of a gray place that wasn't indoors or outdoors, and that I could feel his heart, and he wasn't angry that he'd been murdered. He felt he had disappointed people.
Okay.
He felt sad that he had disappointed everyone. That was,
Wow.
and I knew he didn't want visitors, and so I didn't stay. I just nodded at him, and he nodded at me. But I've prayed for him ever since, and now he's part of my posse.
That's great.
He's my buddy, and so is she, Jacqueline. And
Okay.
I pray with them a lot. They were both very accomplished people with very complex lives. And anyway, that was the very first time that I felt like I'd been taught as a Catholic child that all the saints, Mother Mary is your mother, and she'll hear you when you pray. But I think I mostly thought of them as being away and up. And after that experience with JFK, I thought, well, yes, that might be true, but they can also see you and hear you in a way that now made it all more real for me.
Right. And basically what you're saying is that once these souls cross onward to where they're supposed to be, in other words, not
Yeah.
that they do have that ability, if they choose to either
Yes, and they do that.
participate or...
It's really varied as according to whether they want to hang around here or not.
Right.
And then, of course, in the Catholic Church, the ones that have been canonized have kind of been proven that they're interested in what's going on the earth. In the canonization process, there has to be a miracle.
Right.
That's kind of the Church's way of proving that this person not only lived in a model life, but they also seem to still care about us and want to help us.
Right, which is when there's proof of the miracles and so on and so
Yeah,
forth.
and then a lot of times the saint becomes the patron of something that they loved in life.
Yes.
Somebody that loved farming becomes the patron of farmers, or just the other day, St. Thomas Aquinas is the patron of students because he was a professor and loved students, loved learning.
Yes.
Anyway, it's kind of like that.
Right, exactly. And that's why you also have, I know that, certain countries have patron saints that
Yes, and
the
cities.
country adopted as their, or causes, like you said, because of...
Yes.
So, but what I think is interesting, because, we always think of a saint as somebody that led a certain life that was very religious and upstanding, but from what you're saying is you can also have that participation from people who were not necessarily saints. In other words, regular people.
Yes, that's why on the liturgical calendar, November the 1st is the Feast of All the Saints. Lots of saints, like St. Patrick has, March 17th.
Right.
St. Joseph is March 19th. A lot of them all have their own day, but then we give November the 1st to all these saints, sort of like the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
Right.
We don't know you. We don't know you by name, but we want to honor you anyway.
Yes.
And then the next day, November the 2nd, is called the Feast of All the Souls, who are not canonized saints. Maybe not. Maybe they were never saints at all, but they're like, I think of that as my mom and dad's feast day.
Okay.
They were really loving people, and so if there's a day on the calendar for my folks, it would be November the 2nd.
Right. Exactly.
I can talk to them anytime, and I do, but
Right.
but anyway, that's kind of the way Catholics think about it.
Well, I'm thinking that also your message is very reassuring for people who have lost loved ones. And how can I say it? When you lose a parent, an elderly parent, how's that? You're saddened,
Mm-hmm.
but you know this is supposed to happen this way. In other words, as a matter of fact, that's what your parents always, I'm going to predecease my child.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you're sad, but for people who have lost loved ones prematurely or unexpectedly, or like you said, a child or a sibling, a husband,
Mm-hmm.
reading your stories has got to give them hope as far as that there is something beyond, because I think that a lot of people have a hard time not knowing, is this person okay?
Yes.
It's especially maybe if they died under traumatic scenario. Is this person
Yes.
okay? Their soul, in other words,
Yes.
are they
Yeah.
at peace? And that's got to be very comforting to know that there's something
Well,
that
I
they
didn't
can
really
do.
write the book. I was just trying to report my background in college was sociology,
Mm-hmm.
and in the social sciences, you just try to report the data,
Right.
and then if you're going to conclude anything based upon the data, you're supposed to say that's what you're doing.
Right. But
And I tried to write my book in such a way that I was just storytelling. Here's what I've experienced. And then I would, near the end of a chapter, say, I don't know, but here's what I think. And then I would kind of give my opinion about a thing. I tried to distinguish between the experience and my thoughts about it.
right. Well, and I understand. In other words, what you're like you're saying, this is not data like numbers. This is the quality of your experiences, and then like you said at the end, your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, are you familiar with Raymond Moody's work, Life
Yes,
After
of
Life?
course.
His
Yes,
book
yes,
back in the 70s.
yes.
Well,
yes.
I tried. I remembered that book, and I tried to write in that style of calling it a case study makes it sound too clinical.
Yes.
But scenarios,
Yes.
people's stories, and then I tried to pick ones that I thought illustrated a point particularly well, and would teach the reader something new.
Yes.
So I had so many stories to draw from. I then had to try to pick a dozen that I thought really illustrated the breadth of the field of what I think I'd experienced. And then there ended up being a 13th one just because this one guy, Hal, was so insistent. He wouldn't leave me alone.
Oh, what do you mean? Like,
He
I
wanted
want
the
you to
book in
include me. You got to include me in the book.
I don't know. Well, yeah, it's just a persistent thoughts of Hal kept coming up, and I thought, okay, when that happens, I usually see that as a kind of spiritual indicator that I should pay attention. And by the way, I went back and got all their permission to use their stories.
Okay.
I never thought I'd talk to any of them again. It would be one and done. I helped them cross, and that's that. And in my church, it's kind of frowned upon to talk to the dead anyway. So I wasn't trying to chat them up just to pass the time. But I did feel like I had an important reason. The stories are very personal, and I didn't want to presume permission to use them. So I went back and asked permission. And when I did, I didn't just get yes or no. I kind of got follow-up stories that were really sweet.
Really? Now, let me ask you, have any of them come back to you and said, I need you to come and help this other person out?
No, I haven't had that happen.
No?
But they did come back when asked.
Okay.
And I've been taught that when I address them, they always hear me. And I believe any of your listeners, I think that's not just any charism of mine. That's a universal. If you form a prayer, however you do that, you will be heard by the person that you're trying to speak to, even if in this lifetime you never get any indication that that's true.
Okay.
A lot of people are, when they listen to stories of other people's spiritual experiences, say, well, why doesn't that happen to me?
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I don't know why I'm not a quarterback. I'd like to be playing in the Super Bowl. Why not me?
That's good.
We're all different. That's all. But I do believe if you pass and you always wanted to be a quarterback, you'll get your turn. Eternity's really long.
Yes.
So if that idea stays with you, well, I don't believe that God is going to deny you that. I think one of these days you're going to find out.
I imagine also that it's almost like readiness. Sometimes people aren't ready, even though they think they might be. As far as the living that are left behind, or they want it to be a certain way. Like you said, it's gotta. Oh, if it's not like you said, they hear these stories and they think for it to be real, it's gotta be in my face. It's gotta be like indisputably that. And sometimes maybe they're not ready for a more subtle approach, as far as maybe from the person that they want that reassurance from, or whatever.
Well, one of the reasons that I decided to tell these stories out loud, I kept it private for a long, long time, is I want people to feel safe telling their stories out loud, especially church people can be too hard on themselves, or church leaders can sometimes be scolding and so on. And the church's history is full of spiritual experiences of all kinds, and we shouldn't be ashamed to speak of them. So anyway, I find that when I give talks and things, that very often after a session is over, there'll be a few people that want to talk to me about what happened when their mom died.
Right.
Or some experience they've had of their dead husband or their kid or whatever. Lots of people have lots of stories to tell, and they just haven't always had a safe place to tell them.
Yeah. Yes, I know that sometimes people, especially, I don't want to say it carries a stigma, but they're always afraid that they're going to get that look, like,
yes, yeah,
or that they're going to say, oh, you're grieving and you imagined it, that kind of thing, when they know maybe that it wasn't a question of, no matter how much they were grieving, that it wasn't an imagined, hoped for experience. It was something different.
Yes, and then, people often ask questions like of people that are in grief, how are you doing? And a lot of grieving people have a hard time answering that question because it's complicated and the setting might not allow for a complicated story. Or the person might not really want to hear much out of you. They just wanted to inquire as to your well-being.
Father Nathan, one of the last questions that I had for you was, have you had experiences with people who have committed suicide?
What I've found is they don't often show it to you blatantly in the dream. I don't see somebody putting a gun to their own head.
Right.
The way that the stories are told is a little more subtle than that.
Okay.
And then I've found that once we get into prayer and into conversation, it begins to dawn on me, this person is beginning to sound like they might have suicided.
Okay.
And sometimes they'll volunteer it. That usually means they've told it to at least somebody before.
Okay.
I was telling you, there's kind of a healthcare continuum. And if they've gotten used to telling that story, then it might not be so hard for them to say it to me.
Okay.
Other times they haven't said it before, but they go ahead and say it. Or sometimes I'll ask it as gently as I know how if I think it's important.
Okay.
And just let them know they're not being judged. I'm just trying to help, and I want information that might be useful to me to help them. And then one thing I found is they're no more judged than anybody else.
Right.
They all have a guardian. We Catholics call them a guardian angel, and the guardian just kind of always goes with the flow. If you took your life, well, okay, now you're out of your body, so now we need to deal with that. Right. So come this way, or there are people who take their life hoping that there won't be anything else, that they'll everything will stop and go black, and it just doesn't. they discovered that, oh, I'm still me, and I'm now in a different space. And
right, they're in other words, they're. Oh, I imagine also. Let me ask you, what about people that? And I don't know if you've had that experience. People suicide, whether they're suicidal, that have mental illness, or like you
yes,
described, dementia. Once they pass on, do these conditions kind of clear up as far as their understanding, or are they still in that state of whatever it was that was going on with them as far as an illness or a disease?
the way that I understand it, that anything that is absolutely physical, biochemical, like alcoholism,
Right,
you don't have cells that crave alcohol anymore,
right,
but you do bring with you the habits you created in a life of alcoholism.
okay,
Yeah, if you're familiar with the 12 steps,
yes,
people have to learn how to recognize the damage that they did to their relationships and to other people,
yes,
and those have reality, and they need to be mended in some way.
okay,
And so sometimes in the afterlife, people are doing that work,
okay,
but sometimes they're more eager to do it than is prudent. And like the guy I mentioned to you that drove off the end of a pier and caused the deaths of 3 other people, he wanted to meet up with them now that he's passed, but he was told that's for later.
okay,
So right now, what he ended up doing is sitting by the lake that he died in and watching the sunrise and sunset on it.
okay.
He needed to kind of make peace with this place and not be angry at it.
Right, and it's a process, but not meant as a punishment. It was just that this is what.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Right.
Even the idea of punishment, I remember being disciplined, and the word discipline in Greek is disciple, which just means student. And after I was punished, my dad, after I was disciplined, and he'd make me say what I learned from the experience so that I wouldn't repeat it.
Right. Right.
And to me, that's good discipline. And sometimes in the afterlife, people are needing to do that with experiences that happened during this lifetime where they made matters worse.
Exactly.
They don't have their nose rubbed in it. They just need to acknowledge the truth of it.
Right. In other words,
So they're not shamed. They're just made to acknowledge whatever's true.
or understand it, because sometimes sometimes people evolve into, and like what we're describing here, alcoholism, maybe that's just the symptom, but they never really understood the cause, and maybe they need to work that out or recognize it and understand that that's where it took them in their lives when they were alive. But yeah, you would think that introspection, you need a little bit of time to get there.
It comes down to truth, and people just need to learn the truth of who they are. And I believe that work is cumulative. If we work on our stuff here, there'll be less to do hereafter.
Yes. Yes.
If you can tell the truth of your life here and not be ashamed and just own it, then your chances of passing easily are much improved.
Yeah, and sometimes we really have a hard time with being truthful about ourselves to ourselves. How's that?
Yeah, that's right. And but even if that happens, there's still a remedy for it later. That's what I've learned.
Yes.
Don't worry about it. Not everything has to happen by the stroke of midnight. We don't know when midnight comes. Right. None of us know the moment of our death. And sometimes one of the things I've seen is some kind of sweet attempts at reconciliation in the afterlife, where people are ready to be greeted by somebody that they had been at odds with.
Right. And that, and you always hear about sometimes people that pass away and they never get that chance because they were either stubborn or they just didn't have a chance. They died unexpectedly, or that person wasn't ready to come to their bedside, let's say, for example, or they themselves were so full of anger or not being able to forgive.
Yes, I try to tell people that I believe for example, if you had cantankerous parents or one parent that was a mess and that was no good at parenting because their life was so out of control, Um, I believe it's possible to pray for them and hope for a time when, in the afterlife, when you get to meet the whole healed version of them.
Yes.
And where and that there's all kind of ways it operates. I've seen people that go back. I was with a woman who was sexually abused at the age of 4, and then went on to lead a life of many decades, but always felt like she had to fake a childhood.
Right.
And other people talked about happy childhood memories. She didn't want to stick out.
Okay.
But she didn't really feel like she had what they had.
Okay.
And then after she died, she learned that was the reason, and she decided that she needed to be 4 years old in the afterlife. And she wanted a chance to grow up in the afterlife like other people did and learn the lessons without that overlay of abuse in the background.
Right. And
somehow the afterlife provided that opportunity for her.
Right, an
she
individual soul choice that she made.
Yeah.
That's what she.
And that she wasn't the only person making that choice. One of the things I've learned is that there's lots of different groupings that are sort of like Montessori schools or academies. If there's like Ray, he decided after he learned how to greet his wife, he enjoyed doing it and decided, he asked, can I learn more about this? I'd like to do more of this. And so he essentially signed up for classes.
Okay.
And
he was becoming a social guy, in other words.
Yeah, he didn't like school when he was in it. Growing up in Georgia, he said they always wanted to teach me things I didn't want to know.
Okay.
And then when there was something that he was really highly motivated to learn, found out that he was really a good student.
And of course, that always comes back to he was 20 years old when he passed.
Okay, yes, so
he was, in a way, not even really didn't get a chance to learn about it. I mean, you learn, but not really. There's still a lot of stuff that when you're still 20 that you haven't really kind of like gotten a grip on about who you really are, kind of. So
exactly, and I've watched people kind of recognize that at the time that I died, I was young and inexperienced, and now I have more experience, and now I understand what happened differently.
Yes. And I wonder also, like you said, that with that understanding, also sometimes people are kinder to themselves about mistakes that they've made.
It's important because we're well made. All of us are well made. Even your worst enemy is well made. God made only good. Something happened along the way to cause that jerk to behave like a jerk.
Right, and it makes you wonder: maybe once they get the story, the full story, like what you said, hey, that guy that was such a jerk or a bully or whatever. Later on, I found out why or what happened. What's the background story on this person? And it kind of like, you're like, oh, okay, now I kind of get it.
Yeah,
and you
but there's nothing magic about it. People still have to choose to move through it. They don't have to keep up with the rest of the group. They're not going to be shamed that by now they should have been further along. They just move at the pace that they're willing to move, and eventually it works itself out.
Interesting.
Well, I'm going to need to go.
Yes,
I'd love to be a guest again
Father
if you have more
Nathan,
questions.
you so much. It has been absolutely wonderful to speak to you. By the way, are you planning any new books, any new projects for 2020?
I do. I have a new book I hope is coming out in the fall that will be another in this series.
Okay.
I don't know. It doesn't have a title yet, but Afterlife Interrupted 2 or something else.
Okay.
The people keep coming, and I've got probably about 100 more stories, and I'm going through them and trying to choose ones that I want to have in the next book.
Okay.
I also I tried to create an online video series about this book.
Okay.
It isn't out yet, and I'm not wild about the quality of it. But if people are interested and don't mind seeing something that is, something's better than nothing, and
yes.
I'm trying to do lots of new things. All this business of writing books and websites and all of this, lots of it's new to me, and not all of it is great the first time. But anyway, if people want to follow me, I'm Nathan-Castle.com is the website.
Yes.
And then I'm beginning to do Facebook Live. They could go on my site, which is just my name, Nathan Castle.
Okay.
And I have a new one called Father Nathan Castle that's a few weeks old, so there's almost nobody on it. But anyway, those are ways that people could follow me. And then the book is available on Amazon.
Okay.
It's the Afterlife Interrupted, helping stuck souls cross over. And
Okay.
my name is Nathan G. Castle, OP.
Yeah, I've been showing slides with a cover of the book, and I'll have a link on the credits of the show anyway with a link to your website.
Uh-huh.
And again, thank you so much for spending this time, and the best of luck on all your new projects.
Okay, thanks. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Likewise, thank you so much. Wow. I'm telling you, this is such a great interview because, what did you guys think? Let me tell you, you know, you speak to a lot of people who, and you work in this field who have communication with people who passed on, and God knows there's a variety of experiences that people fall into, from people on the Ouija board and all this other crap. And what I like about what Father Nathan was describing was his message of hope, okay, for people that die, that in some instances you might want to think of them as ghosts, or like what he said in purgatory. They don't have a body that's alive, so they really can't interact, but then they're kind of in a gray in between space where they're not in the presence of the divine. They haven't gone on to where they were supposed to go, and they're stuck for a variety of reasons. Okay. Like what he said about that story about Ray. And it almost makes you think that it was love for his wife that kind of propelled him at the end. Even though maybe it did take him that long to be ready, but it's almost love for his wife that propelled him to reach out and get help, because he wanted to help her cross over into the afterlife. He wanted to be, whether he was kind of like like what Father Nathan said, that he was kind of like a caveman style, whether he was possessive, but still at the root of it, I think it was love. And it almost makes you also think, without knowing the details of particulars, maybe this relationship, this marriage that he had with a high school sweetheart, was maybe when he was experienced really true love as in, and I'm not saying his parents didn't love him, but God, to be beaten while you're praying, that's not good. Maybe this woman had a personality that was soothing his soul, and then he dies, and this love for her is what made him reach out of his isolation that he was existing in, to go beyond it and be there for her. It makes you wonder, did he think, what if this happens to her? What if she gets stuck the same way I did? So it's almost like this unselfish kind of love, that you want to be there for this person, because you don't want them to go through what you've gone through, or maybe he was waiting for her all along, which you normally wouldn't think, but who knows? Maybe in his mind, of course, it sounds like he's died. Talk about weird and unexpected and sudden. And maybe in his mind, he had thought, I'm married, I have a child, I've just gotten this business going. And his plans were maybe to spend the rest of his life with this woman that he loved, and his child, and maybe have more children and everything. And then that went totally sideways, to say the least. So it was almost like, I don't want, in other words, that recognition, I'm dead and she's alive, and while she's alive, I cannot be with her. But once she dies, I want to welcome her, and I want to be able to be with her, to resume what I lost when I died. I mean, it's very complex. I imagine it's as complex as human beings can be, because God knows the different things are important to people. I'm sure that maybe Father Nathan has run across some that maybe what they're holding on to, you or him or anybody could look at and go, that's not a big deal. But for that person, okay, in the way their mind works and their psyche, whatever, this is important. What he said about that young man that didn't want to leave the scene and he had taken his grandmother's car. And you think, okay, wait a minute. The bigger picture on this is, you've passed on, and it doesn't matter. Your grandmother's not going to care. Your grandmother's probably passed on. There's no police that's going to come and get you for leaving the scene. But like he said, you kind of like stuck on that hamster wheel of thinking. And what he's talking about is, we think that hamster wheel or PTSD, like he referred to it, is only for the living. But in reality, that personality of our psyche, we still have it after we die. And sometimes it works against us, in the sense that it kind of like, if you want to think of it, it's like it holds us back. It tethers us like a leg iron, like if you want to think like a ball and chain, from advancing, because we still have all these worldly concerns that don't matter anymore. And, I've said it like in other shows, when people say, that they say, oh, my house is being haunted by the guy that built it, whatever. And it's okay. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. There's some point in you, hopefully when you pass away, when you die, that you shed your physical body, that you realize, I don't need the house anymore. Yes, I might have built it, or I lived here for 40 years, but I don't need it anymore. In other words, that what you would want is for this soul to reach that understanding. That you don't need this house because you don't have a body. This is for the living. This is for people that need shelter, or material things, or ownership of things. Those are things that we have in our ego when we're alive. And in some cases we get caught up, especially with the ownership stuff. But okay, there's other things that maybe we need to survive, like a house, like shelter, like food, whatever it is. But that there's something, to say the least, that changes dramatically when you are not among the living anymore. But when you're still stuck in that mentality of, I need this, or these things matter, it could be a question of ego. It could be a question of too much responsibility. It could be guilt, I imagine. Guilt. I sometimes think, like he was saying, some people are really harsh on themselves. They don't give themselves any slack. Maybe you made a mistake. Maybe people make mistakes. Throughout their lives. Sometimes you recognize them when you're alive, and you have a chance to make up for it. Let's say, either you make, if you hurt somebody, you have a chance to go back and make it up to them, or at least recognize it. Sometimes it's mistakes that you even make against yourself. In other words, you did stupid stuff where you kind of like wreck your life, and you have a chance to like rectify it. And in my experience, 9 times out of 10, when you wreck your life, it's a ripple effect. There's people around you that get affected. Depends how close they are to you. But unless you live on the mountain under the rock, somebody gets affected by it somehow. Okay, if it's not family, it's people around you. But let's say you're one of these isolated type of people. And it takes a while for you to realize it, admit it, and come to the conclusion that it's not too late. It's not too late to do something about it. And how can I say this? That recognition or that decision to try to remedy it, it takes a lot of different forms. Like he was talking about 12-step. Part of 12-step is, if you can, you apologize to the people that you've hurt. If you can. If they're alive, or if you know how to reach them, or whatever. Basically, you're admitting that you made a mistake, and you try to make it right, and you're you kind of understand that there's people that are going to, if you can reach that person, that there's going to be people that accept it, and there's people that might reject you, but that you're at least making the overture of saying I'm sorry. And that's just the process. I mean, there's many things, and it's the beginning of making things right. And but how can I tell you? And that's usually, they do the 12-step for different types of, substance abuse, alcoholism, things of this nature. That's the 12-step process. But you could do a mental 12-step. Let's say, even when you've done things against yourselves, it doesn't have to be an addiction thing. It could be just mistakes that you made about the way you lived your life. What if you were one of these people that was really materialistic? Or that you didn't share enough of yourself. It doesn't, I mean, in other words, it doesn't have to be an extreme kind of thing. And you can do like a mental 12-step. You recognize it, and you have a chance to make it right. But then what he's saying is that there's people that they die and they never get there, or they thought they had a chance, or they thought they had time on their side to make it right. Because, sometimes people make mistakes, whether it's against themselves or other people or those around them. And, all of a sudden, maybe you were crazy when you were youthful, you did stupid stuff, or you hurt other people, and then you kind of grow up, and then you start learning, and you recognize, man, what I did was not right. And you have in the back of your mind, well, not in the back, it's there, like, I got to make it up to this person or persons. And then all of a sudden, you die. And all these intentions that you had, they go by the wayside. Because you always thought, especially if you're not really an old person or you weren't sick, I still have time to go and see these people that maybe I wronged and tell them I'm sorry. Or relationships that kind of got, and you want to make up to them. Or at least give them a chance to say, look, if you don't want to ever look at my face again, fine, but I'm sorry. And if you want to, I'll be there, like talk, I'm sorry. But you never have that chance. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that are important to people that you could see why they would sometimes get stuck. Whether it's misunderstanding about what goes on afterwards, anger, guilt. I can imagine guilt is a big one. And I was curious. That's why I asked them also, what about people that pass on and they're like under the influence of drugs, or they, let's say they have dementia, and their grip on reality when they're alive is not that good, or, I mean, what happens? Does that clear up? Or, but I guess it's an individual thing, and I really like, which is that you can pray for somebody, for their soul, not necessarily having to know an exact name or anything in particular, except to pray for that person or souls. And I want to say, being a Catholic, or, I understand, I was raised as a Catholic, that a lot of people don't understand, like, the purgatory, and purgatory sometimes has a really bad connotation to it. To me, purgatory is always, if I had to filter it through my understanding, it would be to be out of the presence of the divine. You're not being punished, but you're not really where you're supposed to be. And, which, it's got to be really a bad place. I can't think of being a human soul and not having a human body anymore, which is where you're supposed to be here, doing whatever it is you're supposed to be doing. But then you've not gone on to where you're supposed to be either. Or like he said, you either learn or you progress and you work things out, whatever it is that your soul needs to achieve understanding or to go to its next step, its next evolution, whatever it might be. Because let's face it, that's got to be as individual as we are individual humans. We're all made up of so many different experiences from the moment of our birth all the way to the moment of our death, that it's not a one size fit all. Far from it. Far from it. And again, I don't want to say this last thing, and I've said it before. I think that a lot of times, especially with these, a lot of these paranormal reality shows, they kind of forget that at the end of the day, when you talk about ghosts and hauntings and everything, is what you're talking about is a human soul. Okay, and I'm not talking about, these historical places where it's like, it's an urban myth. I'm talking about, when these people, they start doing these, some of these investigations, or they're trying to hype it up. And if there's so many truth, it's like, you're talking about a human soul, a human spirit, a human being that is trapped for whatever the reason might be. Whatever. You're talking about a human soul. Why would you ever want to keep a human soul tethered? Okay. And I understand what he was saying, that this is always comes down to freedom of choice. In other words, when they're ready, they're going to go to where they're, it's ultimately, it's always their choice. Okay. But a lot of times you see some of these shows and it's like, man, this is like, okay, it's entertaining. I'm the first one. I think I've looked at about every paranormal reality show that's out there, has been there, has come and gone. And there's almost like almost like this is not, and by the way, this is assuming we're not talking here make-believe, made up. This is not like a thing. We're talking, let's say the scenario where it's not somebody's imagination or it's not a made-up thing. Let's say there is somebody, that there is an intelligent soul there causing experiences, let's say, that people are having in this certain location. That, do you realize that this is a human being just without a body that might be stuck for whatever reason? And that really what you should want is to like set it free, move it along, help it, like what he does. Not want to keep it around because, man, I'm making a lot of money. People are coming here and they're wigging out because they hear so-and-so walking down the hallway or down the stairs. I don't know. I'm kind of that kind of person. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm the first person that I love haunted houses and all that. But when you really, 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 really start thinking about the dynamics of what you're actually talking about, it gives it a whole different flavor. It gives it a whole different flavor as to you're basically wanting, because, and let me tell you something, in my experience, I have had that experience in cases where I've had owners of establishments and other places that all they want is the paranormal team to go in there and confirm it, or in most cases identify it. But move it on? No, leave it there. Oh no, don't move that ghost along. Don't cross him over. No. And you're like, what? Why would you want that? No, because there's something going on. They're excited. If it's an establishment, no, it's gonna be haunted. And it's like, okay, yeah. But again, and I've said it before, usually that doesn't end up good. That doesn't have a good ending for the living, especially. All right, it doesn't. And I've said that before numerous times. But anyway, guys, I hope you really liked the show. I love speaking to Father Nathan. Like I said, the link to his website will be on the credits of the show. If not, it's nathan-castle.com. And of course, If you have any stories, contact me at marlene@miamigoschronicles.com or marlenepardo.com. I've got a lot of super interesting guests coming on. If you go to miamigoschronicles.com or marlenepardo.com, I also have links to the YouTube videos, or you can either go and listen to the MP3 file, download the MP3 file, or I have links to the different podcast platforms like iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Deezer, you name it. I've got all my shows, which is storiesofthesupernatural.info, nightshade.com, and supernaturalstorytime.com. All of those individual episodes are all found on all the major podcast platforms. Again, guys, you're all wonderful, and thank you so very much for being part of my audience. Take care.